Hello, this is JP with the Voice of Tradition, and today I'd like to talk about villains. Dun dun dun! Yes, cue up that dramatic music, because today we are going to see ourselves become the villain, because you can live long enough to see yourself become the villain, or die soon enough to become the hero. Depends on the day. Depends on the time. Maybe even depends on the place. Long enough, we know how far villains reach back in history. Long enough, we know how far heroes reach back in history. Sure, we like the triumphant hero story. And sure, we like the triumphant villain story. Sometimes. Depends on the villain. They're usually more complex characters. They usually have a lot more than just conquering the world as their motivation. Although that could be their only motivation. But they definitely have a very strong tradition in stories. Because what would be the point of having a hero if there was no villain to conquer? Now, it could be something as conquering demons, as conquering yourself, as overcoming your fears. A villain could be something that is not exactly tangible. Or it could be something definitely tangible. Like one of my favorite villains, the Joker from Batman, never has a motivation to really what he's doing or what he's thinking or why he even does it, which fascinates me to no end, to absolutely no end. I mean, it's just the kind of character that villainy needs. Agent of Chaos, but that's what villains are most of the time. So, we all know the villain is a tragic hero in some respects. He's an anti-hero. In other respects, he's a straight-up bad guy. But you have to give him where credit is due. Still, when they're motivated to get what they want, then they should capitalize on that aspect. Because if a villain doesn't have to serve their own interest, then what's the point of being a villain anyway? Now it is fair to say that all villains act selfishly. It is fair to fill dirt in more villains where they could also act unselfishly. But what would be the point of the dirt? It just would be an empty hole. It wouldn't do anything for the plot. It wouldn't do anything for history if the villain was just worth his weight in dirt and selfish dirt. Because there's way more motivations than this selfishness. But one of the primary factors of being a villain is fulfilling one's own most selfish desires. Now, when they also act unselfishly, then who's to say that the tragedy could be turned into an opportunity? Who's to say that the tragedy could become something more? They usually use a tragic event to sponsor the hero and a villain as to give way to the story. But what's going on inside the villain's mind, and even the hero's mind, there's something to be said that the villain is able to respond with that, and how they've used it to build their mentality and created momentum for the story and for history. So, who's to say when they respond, it's something that's being met with despondency, and the hero that has to take action to that despondency? Who's to say that that's categorically bad? Sometimes you have tragic heroes who have to act. Sometimes you have tragic villains who have to act. Think of Spawn, Al Simmons. He was the world's most elite hitman. He became a general in Satan's army. So he, therefore, is a tragic hero, but also seen as an evil villain. Depends on the perspective, because obviously he's working for the bad guy, but he wants to make things right because of his own tragedies in his life. And he sees it from his aspect of him not being able to see his family. So there's the tragedy right there. That became the most human part about him. through all of his transitions and becoming a hellspawn. So, who's to say that even the most vicious villain doesn't even have a sense of compassion or humanity to them? Sometimes you gotta sympathize for the villain. That can be a dangerous task. But with all that despondency, the hero still has to take action. And if it was just for dominating the world as the motive, which is the usual motif, then what a boring story. And how would they know that this is something to behold? How would they know that the world they're dominating is something to even be worth it? So, sometimes you got to see yourself become the hero. Sometimes you become the villain. This has been JP for the Voice of Tradition, and that is all.